Well, good day, everyone. This is James Jude with Wipro, and I'm absolutely delighted to continue my series on the Wipro Chief Data and Analytics Officer podcast with one of my favorite people, Kaushal Kurapati, who has had an amazing career weaving artificial intelligence into some of the most important companies that affect our lives, our ERP, and the way in which we think about business processing. So, Kaushal, I wanted to thank you for joining us here at Wipro on this conversation. And I wanted to go through your background very quickly, but there's a lot that I want to tie together here, as you and I have spoken about the fact that AI has been a key part of your life for probably longer than most people on this call. But also you've woven in analytics and insights into some of the most interesting problems in industry. I'll start off on a personal note that Kaushal and I actually met in a major search engine 20 years ago. We worked together for many years, and he built perhaps the best search promotion algorithm in the world. And it's fascinating how for a search engine, all of the technologies of big data and low latency and AI and Hadoop at the time and everything came together. And it's really remarkable what goes on behind the curtains of a search engine. And really, I think, Kaushal, for people like you and I, it sets us up to go in different paths in our career. So tell me what you've been up to for the last 10 or 15 years, and then we'll get into the two topics of GenAI and Agentic AI that you're an expert in.
First of all, thank you, James, for this invitation and the opportunity to share some thoughts. It's always a pleasure. Great to reconnect with you. As James shared, we worked together and we were office mates for a while in a small search engine, which but mighty one at the point.
Yes.
And that started the journey, in fact, for many of the things I'm doing today, and a lot of us do in generative AI. Search is a fundamental part. It's one of the original kind of consumer-facing applications which used AI, even if many people did not know it at the time. Used a lot of heuristics, of course, but also a lot of initial algorithms in gradient descent and so on, and ranking and relevance. So we got acquainted with that early on, and a lot of concepts which are pretty mainstream now. But search itself is undergoing a transformation in generative AI, and that's really fascinating to see. But I spent time in search at Ask Jeeves and Yahoo later on, leading many search initiatives there. And I went on to build a lot of personalization platforms. In my first stint at Oracle, I built personalization and customer data platform, allowing enterprise customers to bring what is siloed data streams into one single platform,
right?
And allowing them to do better personalization. Because if you're not seeing the full picture of a customer and customer, then you're not really doing a great job in your personalization. And many companies struggle with that, right? So I had an opportunity to build that out. And I led a large team of product engineering and data scientists across the world to deliver great innovative solutions. Then Salesforce came knocking about at the cusp of when ChatGPT kind of broke onto the world. And they asked me to come and shape the vision for an AI platform and build up what turned out to be the first version of the generative AI stack that helped to power what Salesforce calls Agentforce now. So
yes, right.
Had a very good first row view for generative AI and helping shape that. And now I'm back at Oracle doing a second stint where they formed a new division for building out an AI agents platform, and I'm helping lead the product management efforts for that.
So, Kaushal, in that journey, I was speaking earlier on one of my podcasts with two people, Tom Allen, who created the AI Journal from the UK, and someone from Ernst & Young who was speaking about the old days of AI, that I grew up in the 1980s, where you had symbolic AI. And we recognized that it wasn't truly reasoning, but it was a simplifying. Instead of doing if then else logic for hundreds of pages of code, you basically gave rules and gave it information. We've seen it go from that kind of thing where the real the real barrier to adoption was the cost of knowledge learning. It was overwhelming. How have you seen the AI entering? I'm not talking about consumers having AI on their phone. We all know that there's AI listening, to our phone. That's how it can read our speech. But how have you seen it weave through? And how has sort of traditional symbolic AI moved into what we now have with Gen AI, almost an obsession with producing human-like text and pictures, but it isn't really relevant to business process. I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but I'm wondering how you've seen that weave, and especially at Oracle, I'm sorry, at Salesforce, how you were trying to make Gen AI fit in practical purposes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey, right? I mean, I think we've seen sort of AI has existed for about 70 years since the
Yeah.
term was coined in the 1950s. And it has the original conceptualizations that Alan Turing had and many others in the pioneers had is really come to fruition in a way now.
Yes.
And it's gone through many AI winters and a lot of promise, but not yet delivering that kind of results. And many different, I think, trends had to come together to be able to bring us to this point. I think of the three things, essentially data, compute, and algorithms,
Yeah.
right? I think data, one sort, I mean, how much data is available to kind of feed in to a particular model. And we used to be able to feed in sort of bits and pieces if you from a tiny, very tiny compared to what we are doing today. And that has really started scaling up at some point in about 15 years ago when folks discovered that let's feed a lot of data into a model and let us see what it can figure out, right? I mean, that's the beginning of the deep learning era and beginning of this famous cat recognition sort of experiment that happened. And suddenly the
Yeah.
model could auto recognize without anybody telling it that these are pictures of cats, actually,
Yeah,
right?
Kaushal, so that's an interesting point because we really reached the stage where instead of posting a hypothesis and trying to, let's say, automate the answer, we just said, here's data, you tell me,
You tell me,
what
yeah.
is the most discriminating variable? All that classic cart stuff, where you go
Yep.
through one variable at a time is irrelevant.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
we've let the model kind of figure out saying, oh, then that really unleashed a huge wave of innovation when people started thinking, oh, we feed in more data and then maybe it could recognize something else and something else. And, all the objects that, the object recognition becomes a
Yeah.
great sort of application in a variety of ways. And if that was the only innovation, then we would have taken the models would have taken a long time to really uh, you know uh, understand the world and generate a meaningful insight of that we need. But what we started doing at the same time, and this comes from high performance computing, where GPUs started to become sort of come into work there. And NVIDIA basically discovered a application where these people were hungry for compute. With the amount of data that they were throwing in, it was not just about the data, but they wanted these models to run fast and really recognize pictures very fast, or and then later on text patterns and so on and so forth. But essentially, we started throwing in far more compute in the last few years. It's been growing at 4.5x per year than where it was growing at about 1.5x prior to that. So we started throwing in a lot more compute and a lot more data. And there is a famous kind of paper or, you know, essentially a better lesson that was written by one of the Turing Award winners this year about deep learning, that essentially if you throw in enough data and compute, the model will learn itself. It'll learn to learn and it'll recognize patterns, it'll recognize
Yes.
concepts. um, and of course then the third leg of this stool is algorithms, which is the innovation in algorithms is that here we've started to figure out how to use maybe less and less data and less compute to get to the same quality that earlier models kind of uh, were at. So the algorithmic innovations, Transformers paper from 2017, all of it unleashed the fact that you can throw a lot of data, a lot of compute, and it won't take like an eternity to learn, but the efficiency in algorithms is growing up even better with now DeepSeek R1 and so on. So we can get into all of that, but essentially these three vectors, data, compute, and algorithms, I think have essentially been drivers to bring us to this point where we are able to generate text, generate images, recognize various patterns, and essentially have models which are multitask learners. Earlier, we had models which were kind of pointed on a particular task and so on.
Yeah, what's interesting there is we don't seem from a business perspective yet to know when the learning is good enough to solve the task. In many cases, we're ultimately asking AI to help us with very discrete decisions. For example, what color is most pleasing on the screen, from automated A/B testing, or what price point is most attractive.
Yeah.
You don't need an algorithm to go down to the thousandths of a penny. It has to quantize in a sense. I don't know if we've gotten to that stage yet where we've intersected economics. To carry that analogy a step further, I'm fascinated by the idea of learning. It's sort of like you get, your high school and then you go bachelor's and master's and PhD. At what point, in effect, do you know enough to do the job you're assigned for? Is it worth getting a PhD if
Yeah.
you're managing claims for a healthcare provider?
Mhm.
And the answer is no. Literally, it's a waste of money. Not that, someone needs to have a PhD, but not them. We haven't
Right.
seemed yet to have quite applied that to our models.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I think there are indications that models have got getting to do some of the work that, a PhD level work, if you will,
Yes,
on
right.
literature surveys and things like that when you're writing a scientific paper, or even in many other fields, even if it's not a PhD, you begin to question whether an MBA is needed, for instance, right? Because there are evidences of models now getting, or deep research and models now getting to the point where you give it a sufficiently good prompt and engage in a conversation with a model, and it will produce probably a report which is what equivalent to maybe a junior analyst might produce in the starting point of their job. And you begin to wonder whether some of these degrees have to reinvent themselves, and education itself has to reinvent in the context of these models and the capabilities.
Yeah, I'm going to carry that thought in just a moment, but it reminds me of what John Thompson, the EY global head of AI, told me. He has 300,000 people working on his platform.
Mhm.
And one of the things I want to weave into your conversation is he and I both agreed that Gen AI, to produce, a poem for your dog, or, something clever, or a picture of whatever you think of, a mouse riding a rocket to the moon. That's
Yeah,
awesome, but it has very little business application, really.
that's right.
At what point can we trust Gen AI to handle a complex insurance claim, or to,
Right.
to evaluate a treaty, or some kind of a contract? Um,
Yeah.
and he had that exact thing. Is it is doing? They haven't. We talked about, do you make everybody 10% better, or do you lay off 10% of your staff? They're at the stage of 10% better. We'll see whether history allows that to, and cost pressures will keep that up. The point I'm getting to is what he learned, though, was that in fact the junior analyst could be automated. And that's great for the company and great for the clients, but it says something about the career path. We're going to have to rethink how people get into technology, even in the business I'm in with Wipro. The classic ETL, the sort of Informatica source to target mapping, that was an entry point 25 years ago. Now that is completely automated. We have almost nobody doing
Yeah,
that work.
that's right.
So I don't think we can solve society's problems, but I wanted to really pivot a little bit in this topic to where, as the senior VP of Gen AI at Salesforce, where did you see Gen AI really making a difference?
Yeah.
But where did it fundamentally change business process? You talked about Agent Force. I don't know if you were involved in Einstein, um, but
Yes, I
but
was.
let's get to that, because that's what I think my chief data and analytic officers want to hear is, now that the cool factor has become normalized and we all know you can write a poem, where do you put it? Where does it really change the business?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I mean, initially, when 2023, it seemed like these models could do anything and everything, and also there's no limit to it. And we're seeing the evidences of that. The models have really increased quality and at a pace that it's never been seen in the history of technology in a way. So the excitement is there, and also, but it was tempered always with that fact that there are hallucinations, that this is the very nature of the model. In fact, it's not a bug as much, but it's like really predicting the next token. So it is going to sometimes predict the wrong thing, or it will fill in a gap if it doesn't have the data. So where we started to see a need for controlling some of that, saying with trust-based model, the responsible AI, to bring in some of these principles into it. And where we saw big differences is we initially said, okay, what are some places where this model can be applied very reliably and repeatably to deliver business outcomes that a business person can rely on a day-to-day basis. And customer service was one particular area we
Yes,
definitely
right.
right. And I think it's become a very standard thing to look at and see. And a lot of people have found success in it, and we were no different back then, right? It was so among all the cases that we looked at, I think marketing also, many aspects of marketing have been automated over the years, and many aspects will be automated. And this is generation of personalized content, even if it's an image that would, we think, resonate with James versus Kaushal, that difference, you can now do it at a scale and also do it with synthetic images. But the problem there was the hallucinations and the bias that can be induced in some of this content generation kept us from really going deep into that yet. But that was about an year and a half ago, but things could have changed. Now it's
Right.
becoming far better. The one that we really saw success, like I was saying, was customer service, and essentially a simple use case where agents write what are called case wrap-up summaries at the end of a conversation with a
Yes,
end
right.
customer, right? So they've engaged in a chat conversation or a phone conversation or whatever it is. They've taken notes, and they need to write up a summary, which will usually take 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever it is, and input into some kind of a knowledge base or database of some sort, because they can use it for future similar cases, or the customer calls back and you need to have the notes. Now, if you were to be able to reliably generate a quick summary of that conversation by feeding in all that automated transcript, then you are really going from manually writing it and to generating something that's very consistent and has the same tone every single time, and cut shorting that process to maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes, where a human then quickly looks at what was generated, and it essentially says, he or she says, it's fine, it's okay, or make the edits and submit it. So you're
Yeah.
suddenly going from about cutting down the time by more than 50% of a task that is dependent on a person at what time of the day they're doing it, whether they're fatigued or not, whether to their writing skills, and so you're now making a process much more repeatable, much more reliable and consistent, and also saving a tremendous amount of time, freeing up that person maybe to do more calls or engage in more strategic activities if that may be the case. So we saw
Yes.
a tremendous amount of success in that particular use case.
Yeah, and we've done similar projects at Wipro. What's
Mhm.
interesting, Kaushal, though, is, do we need like an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, to do the next step, which is to look at all those call logs and discover that it's a flaw with the UX that is leading to people to call. It's one thing to have a cheaper, shorter call, but why did the call happen? So, that's where it gets interesting, is who has the responsibilities to build a model, because
Yeah,
then you're really tying everything together,
right,
product development, marketing, sourcing, reliability, warranty, it all comes together.
right.
Um,
It's that's a fascinating thought. I mean, I think the pace at which models are going, and of course they're absorbing the general internet and the general sort of human expertise, if you will, and becoming good at various
yeah,
things. Now, if you asked me a year ago, I would have said that kind of a model was probably very far away. of because it requires a lot of common sense, it requires a lot of knowledge about
Yes.
various processes around the company and how a UX has been built and things like that. But given the pace at which things are going, it doesn't seem like too far-fetched anymore. And it seems to me, though, still a model has to be exposed to that kind of knowledge, but also that kind of wisdom and historical decisions that have been made, and the interactions that a person would have, and the decisions that they would make, and be essentially or be on the shoulders of people and watch over what they're doing. And that sort of an interaction graph and action graph is probably not there, and that's mostly because of the lack of that data and that construction of that graph. So this brings to a point of, if that kind of a graph and data and interactions exist, and they do exist, but they are in tribal knowledge today, or humans capture it in their brain. But if that were to be codified into a model, then I don't see how that becomes easy for a model then to start taking these, predicting the next things to do, and at a broader meta level.
Yes.
Maybe that's the
Yeah.
next step in where things will go.
The chatbot call center rep though is one of the sort of classic low hanging fruit for Gen AI,
Yes.
right? We still hear that.
Yes.
And I think at some point that's going to be largely solved. We have yet to see, literally hundreds of thousands of call center reps being laid off. What about, are there any other business processes, either inside of the companies you worked at or that you helped to develop, that
Mhm.
fundamentally take over a job rather than a task? For example, somebody reviewing contracts. That's another Ernst and Young example we talked about
Mhm.
with John Thompson. Um, or I don't even want to presume. I'll just leave it open because
Yeah.
it does seem like that's a good use case, but a good board of directors or CEO is going to say, what's next? And are
Yeah.
we going to be stuck at things that are purely text? When
Right.
can we really start, thinking and recommending contract terms and all that good stuff?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think from where the industry is at, it seems like task automation is where it has come to. The
Yeah.
reliability and repeatability, again, I'll use those terms again. The the models that can perform tasks repeatably and reliably and consistently over a period of time, it's gotten to a point where tasks are getting automated, but not yet jobs. So not yet is a
Yes.
key operative word, I think. So the use cases that in business processes, I think where, in addition to the customer service examples that we saw, I think there has been time savings in essentially a lot of the summarization type tasks that are there, whether it's program management folks, or a lot of us take notes on particular calls, right?
Right.
And now you can have an AI essentially listening in and generate key points so that you can focus on listening to the person who's actually speaking and paying attention to their body language and so on and so forth, while the note taking is being kind of that task has been outsourced, so to speak, for the AI, right? And that's a great use case. It saves time, it is reliable, it does a good job of it, it won't miss it. And you can see it in doctor patient conversations. You can see
Yes.
it in uh, I've been to my doctor a few months ago, and they asked for permission to record the call, and I said yes, that's fine. And I asked them afterwards what they were doing, and essentially it was generating a transcript, obviously recording every moment, and generating a precise notes that the doctor will quickly review and again put it in, uh, so that they don't need to be distracted and taking notes, and they might forget something in a 45-minute conversation.
Yeah, and also that I'm sure they developed a very specific small language model that understood the language
The
of the
terminology and language.
specialty, so
That's
that it
correct.
wouldn't try to. Yeah, if you and I
It
had that
would,
same conversation on most
yes,
transcriptions, it would butcher it.
it would
But
butcher it.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
And I think other business processes I see essentially are in the space of even generating data, sort of metadata, essentially, right? If you point So you show some amount of data and say this is the kind of metadata that's there, and but some metadata is missing for these other data elements that you have. And today it would be a very tedious task, and you probably won't even do it, and that's why your data is incomplete. But you could really, because of the examples you could show where the data has been, metadata has been reliably sort of generated by humans, and you can use a few short examples with many models and say, generate metadata for these other missing data elements, then you suddenly have a very complete and rich data set, as an example. And that becomes, that looks like a very kind of an unsexy kind of problem, but it delivers a lot of business value because you are now have a data rich layer where your AI can perform even better jobs because now your metadata is also there. And so you've used sort
Yes,
of
right.
AI in multiple ways to kind of enrich your essentially the inputs itself, so that a better model can make better use of it, essentially.
Yeah, to roll back the clock 8 or 10 years ago when I helped launch an AI practice at my last company, that is the classic case we looked for was where you had digitized, data, but you also had human thought that extracted something of value. That was the
Yep,
perfect training set.
that's right.
Like you said. So if somebody, through the hard way did an analysis of a tax return or analyzed contracts and extracted
Yep,
obligation clauses, if that had been done often enough, that's the
yep.
perfect use case,
Mhm.
which is kind of a parallel to what you talked about earlier, where you just give it data and don't tell it what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So let
Yes.
me ask a question before we get into agentic AI, which is sort of the next wave of that, because the word agent is right there. In your prediction, I'll ask what I call the 20%, 20% question. Do you think that AI is largely going to make all of us 20% better, faster, and cooler than we
Mhm.
were? Or are we going to have 20% fewer of us doing the same work? Or
Yeah,
is that the wrong question?
no, it is. It's a great question. And actually, it is one of the most pressing questions I'm sure a lot of economists are asking and a lot of
Yes.
policymakers are asking around the world. And it has significant implications for how the century will actually shape up, right?
Yeah.
And how geopolitical forces, you can go into trade, immigration. There's all kinds of impacts that will reshape because of this technology now that's come up and changing the world so rapidly. In fact, I don't think human beings have dealt or know how to deal with this kind of a amount of quick change in a way, right? To draw parallels, I mean, I think there are so one maybe one thing to keep in mind is, if you consider this to be a revolutionary change, then
Yeah.
revolutionary changes mean generally, or the implication is that everything has to change, meaning organizational structures have to change, skills have to change among a large segment of the population. To your point earlier, agriculture was the only skill that a lot of people
Yeah.
had. But to transition to professional jobs, or setting up new shops, or moving to cities and doing other things in factories and so on, they had to really retrain themselves, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
government might have, some countries and governments might have done a better job in helping the transition. It's never easy. It's turbulent, nevertheless, anywhere. And it brings up sort of migrant labor issues in cities and infrastructure issues, and so many other sort of dimensions to this. So the fundamental question I think you're asking is a really pertinent one. Will this give that kind of a lasting productivity boost? And will this also cause large scale job displacement and transformation of various kinds? I, for one, I think believe that we are at the beginning of that sort of cycle of change. And I do think that it will impact a vast segment of the world in various ways. And we
Yes.
haven't we haven't yet seen that, of course. It'll play itself out in the next decade and 20 years and so on. The models are fast and they're coming up with tremendous qualities, but we all know that for it to seep into the broader world, whether when your doctor is using such a thing, or your lawyer is using a such a model to shape contracts, or customer service, departments are not 1,000 people in call centers anymore, but just maybe 50. That really changes the economics of many different places across the world. And
Yes,
service
yes.
industry, which depends on them, for instance, could change. All these people who are suddenly out of a job, perhaps, or they're asked to do something else, they have to go back to school and retrain. What do you learn? How does that, are the new jobs there? Is prompt engineering the new job, for instance? That might be in many places.
But we
But
won't
then,
need as many prompt engineers as we needed call service reps. So
as
that's the
call service
problem.
reps.
Yeah,
That's right. That's a problem as well. And
yeah,
also, the skill sets that might be needed are probably different, because somebody who's actually trained as a linguist, perhaps, can suddenly find a much better job, because the new language is English or whatever the local
yeah.
language is, and they are in demand for writing better prompts rather than somebody else who's actually a data scientist or an engineer, for that matter, right? So I think there is going to be a productivity boost, no doubt. I do see that in many sort of functions and use cases that we've talked about. If somebody who's spent 40 minutes doing a task, it's gone down to 10 minutes, then they do have that 30 minutes extra. Of course, some of that might go into social media and some wasting of
Yes,
time
right,
of various
right.
kinds. And that's the debate that's been existing, for instance, with the internet itself. Did it give a productivity boost, or did it not? And there are economists that come on both sides of that, by the way. The jury is still out, I think. We did get a productivity boost in the US, at least, and from 96 to '04, when it went up to 3.3%. But historically, it was 1.5%. And after '04, it did come down to 1.5%.
Right. Well,
Now,
we sort of embraced the productivity and then didn't have the next step. And that's my
right,
fear on Gen
that's right.
AI. That
Yeah.
first wave of better call service, if that's
Hmm.
pretty much Gen AI's,
Hmm.
legacy before it
Yes,
disappears, that's sad,
that would
you
be
know.
sad. Yes.
Um, so with at some point on Lee, I'll tie this back on your thoughts on the chief data officer and the chief analytic officer
Hmm.
and what's their role. But let's talk about agentic AI, if you could. If you want to give your definition, and I know in your current role, congratulations on that. I know that's new. This is for history. This is March of 2025 that we're talking, so I have that on record. But
Yes.
I'm fascinated by that. But as I was telling you in the intro before we turned on the camera, suddenly half the people I know and respect on LinkedIn have written an agentic AI post. It seems like that became the new thing you have to have an opinion on. Um,
Yes.
what is it? How's it affect? And how does that tie with Gen AI, or is it a whole different class of thing?
Yeah, no, they're very related, obviously. And I think the term agents has been there in the AI literature for a while. I remember, in fact, writing a paper 20 years ago when I was building recommender systems of a multi-agent TV recommender. So that, to me, agents are defined as something that has agency, which means
Ah, yes,
can
yes.
take decisions, which can take make some uh, actual transactions and adjustments and take an action, essentially, right? How does it do it? It should be aware of the environment, the context, the business context, or the goal context that it's operating in. It takes input from the environment. It takes feedback from a user or another system about how it's doing, or adjusts its approach. It can use tools now, essentially tools as in it can use a calculator, it can use a search engine, it can use maybe a business tool, a database of some sort, lookups and whatnot. And it should then be able to plan out its steps. It should be able to, given an objective, given a goal, it should be able to plan out the number of steps. We all do that in our everyday lives. If you have
Yes,
to go
right.
from New Jersey to Midtown Manhattan, you plan out your route, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And depending on the day and the time and so on, you might take one approach, or you're going to Midtown or Lower Manhattan, whatever it is. You're taking a particular approach, so you plan it out. or you're booking a family vacation, you plan it out. You're performing a wedding, you plan it out, right? So there are steps, and in business we all do that. You have to get a project off the ground. You have to plan it out. Do I have the right people? Do I have the right structure? Are we executing or focused on the right things? Do you have the strategy and
Yeah,
so on?
exactly. Yeah.
So there's a series of plans and steps and decisions and incremental adjustments we do as human beings. And I think if an agent is able to do that, that's when you would call it, a system is able to do that. That's when I would say that you would call it a true agent. Now,
So
that
what I'm
said,
hearing is the example would be Gen AI would be great at, let's say, reading a legal document and extracting,
mhm,
the obligation phrases, right? The monies, the
right,
dates, and the like. And that's a use case that I worked on at my previous company.
right.
But an agent would be able to say, make two suggestions for an itinerary for a vacation.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's a complex thing, right? Because then it has to say, well, this is the best hotel, but it's not free that night. And I know,
that's right.
I think I get where you're headed is agents
Yeah,
have a lot of agency. Are
yes.
we going to trust that in business, or do you think that's likely to just produce a recommendation list, which would still be helpful? I mean, I'd love to have five vacation suggestions,
That's right.
you
And I
know?
think where the industry is at, I mean, if you look at where March 2025, right? I mean, where what I've seen with customers in across the industry, and also speaking to whether it's venture capitalists or startups and participating in various forums, what I see is that the decision outsourcing is not happened yet, because I don't think the reliability of agents and the complex decisions that we as decision makers take at certain levels or every level of in any company, the agents are not reliable and or powerful yet to understand these complex workflows and make those decisions. That said, a draft of a certain document or a certain argument that I need to make can be one task in that decision making process, and that can be now you can probably use a agent or a system which has some amount of sort of agency in putting forth the options in front of you given a context and so on. Now, again, the models and reasoning powers of models are improving dramatically in the last few months itself, from various vendors that are coming up both in the United States and China and across the world. So you are seeing the beginnings of what is, if and when they're exposed to these complex decisions and complex workflows in companies, I think we will be seeing in the not too distant future, I think, where some of these decisions will be sort of, will rely upon them. And I don't think humans will be completely out of it, because again, I think it depends on the level of that decision, the impact that it will have. If it's a smaller decision that's reversible, that's easy enough, even if it's you make a mistake, it's okay, then I think people and companies will be comfortable in sort of saying that's okay for this particular system to make. But then as the stakes kind of go up, I think you'll want accountability. Essentially, that would be a big issue if an agent makes a decision but then a company is implementing it, then who is held to be held accountable? Today we have people who are in those positions to be held accountable for that. I think so those issues have to be, will still be front and center. And but the capability will be there. I think there might
Yes.
be a case where it'll generate sort of drafts and options for you, and you will still use your entire worldly experience and intuition and business training and so on to make that final sort of call.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in your role, both with Oracle and Salesforce, you engage with companies, many, many, many companies that use your software. The and of course integrated in the business process. The chief data officers, chief analytics officers, people that are governing the use of their data, whoever's the most senior data governance,
Mhm.
what do you think their role is in this conversation? Are they just sort of waiting for the vendors to put that in their catalog? Should they be leading this? Maybe they run the risk of doing it on their own and then it's obsolete because 6 months later an ERP vendor does it for them.
Yeah,
I've seen a number of my clients do custom bespoke work and then find that, Einstein, for example, solves a problem that they
Mhm.
solve themselves. Any thoughts that you have in your engagement with that community? So at the target companies you sell to, what
Yeah,
should my CDOs, CAOs be doing
yeah.
about all of this?
No, I think they're rightfully in their initially and even today the concerns, or I should say concern is probably the right word, but it's more the things that they're grappling with are what is the uh, what is the permission set for this data, as an
Yeah,
example, data security, data lineage, and is my data going to be used in some way with the models to help them train, and so somebody else is benefiting with my experience and my data. So I think initially in 2023, that was a big concern. A lot of model vendors came out and said, and we all signed as users of those models, or purchasers of those models. We said zero data retention policies need to be in place. So all
right.
the vendors, basically model vendors, came out and agreed to that and said, look, we will sign something as a contractual clause saying we will not be retaining your customer data for improving and training our models. Right. So, and they have since then implemented tools for customers to go in and check the validity of whether they're doing that or not, or compliance of that. So data compliance, again, the governance of that became important. I think it's important to ask those questions of your first CDOs and chief analytics officers.
Yes,
If
right.
a vendor that you're purchasing from has those zero data retention agreements, and do what tools and what processes do you have if I want to go and sort of kind of audit that, right? Data security is another aspect of it, meaning access control to data is restricted. We all know that, right? I mean, HR data, only certain people are eligible to see it. Payroll data, only certain people are eligible to see it. An employee should be able to see their own payroll and their own benefits. As a manager, you can probably see your directs and so on,
Right,
and your
right. That's
officers.
a classic solve problem. Yeah,
Right.
but we have
It's
to
a
preserve that thinking.
we have to preserve that in the context of when you're employing, let's say, a benefits agent, as an example, an AI agent, which goes and allows employees to ask questions of what are my benefits? Did my premium go up from last year to this year? Now, you shouldn't be able to ask about what my neighbor has as a health plan, or what are their benefits, or what is their family situation, and so on. So that would violate, obviously, a lot of laws. So you have had this access control implemented in workflows and with enterprise SaaS vendors for many years, for decades. Now, you want to be able for the agents to withhold and be able to preserve that data sanctity, as an example, right? So you also don't want, at the second point of it is, you don't want that model to hallucinate, that agent to hallucinate and say,
Yeah.
suppose that information for some reason wasn't accessible or available, you should not respond to the employee saying, oh, let me make up a number for it. Oh, your premium went up by $100, or it did not go up at all. You
Yeah.
don't want to give false information, essentially, right? If you don't have access to it, and or for some reason the system is down and you could not access it, the agent should come back and say, sorry, I am not able to answer that question at this point, and you may want to contact some other person or call this number or whatever it is, right? So you want to look at sort of data from a variety of these angles, and also sensitive data. If something is eyes only for certain stakeholders in the company, how do you ensure that there are protections on that, and the agent is not accessing that information, because the agent doesn't know anything. The agent will access whatever. It'll just check for the permissions. If the permissions are not there, it'll think that, okay, it can access it and retrieve that information. Now they're so powerful that they're able to retrieve this information, but you should have the right safeguards, essentially. That
And of course, to even carry that safeguard as some kind of a mark on the final document. It may, you may have the authority to ask about X, but if it generates a PDF for you,
right.
that can get lost as you hand it around.
That's correct. That's correct.
I would also think, Kaushal, there's kind of like an orchestration layer an agent needs.
Exactly.
One of the failure stories I heard, which was fascinating, was somebody threw GenAI on top of their sales data just to see what the company thought. People loved
Yep.
it. My 10 best-selling products in Los Angeles, and all this. And then they discovered they were spending millions and millions of dollars a month solving a problem that was already in their Click or Tableau business
Mhm.
intelligence cube.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I could see where that would be an interesting thing is to distinguish the deep questions from the surface questions and
Yes,
not use massive compute power for the simplest of things.
exactly. I mean,
You
I
know,
think there is, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I think finish
oh
your
no,
thought.
that's yeah,
Yeah, I think the you're exactly right. I think there are models that are coming up now, and I think model vendors are also headed this way, is we all know that there are models with varying capabilities, and you know that's usually reflected in the parameter size that they show or the way they were trained and so on. And now there are models which are reasoning models as well, which think before they answer. It's essentially, if you think about how human beings perform, a more complex, let's say, quantum mechanics problem or something will take a person certain amount of time to solve versus just answering 2 plus 2,
yeah,
right? So we all use different amount of brain power and compute for different types of problems. That's fairly obvious for anybody who's even a child. Now, models which are typical language models use the same amount of compute per token if they are not reasoning models. So now we are seeing the advent of reasoning models which think for a longer period of time before answering. So they are more capable. So we're seeing a class of models which are very across the spectrum, and we're seeing smaller, more powerful models which can now even run on a phone pretty soon.
yes, right, right,
So to your point, the simplicity, the complexity of the question, or the simple nature of it, depending on where in the spectrum it falls, an agent or a system should be able to discern its complexity and say, I am going to go to the right kind of model and use a cheaper one because I don't really need a huge sort of powerful hammer to for this nail. I just need a smaller sort of, I guess, weapon or model in this case,
yes,
right?
right, right,
So summarization doesn't need the frontier model that you're spending $60 per million tokens. Now, if a summarization model can only cost 5 cents per million tokens, and that would be enough. Whereas a thinking model might be needed if you're really giving it a complex problem. Do a literature survey of all the some on a particular disease or something, and come back with some recommendations of where there are gaps and what is a problem that's not solved and so on. That is
yeah,
a complex problem, and that is something that frontier models can now tackle. So there are,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, you need to be using different ones for different problems.
I have two topics I'd be interested in your thought on. I
Yep.
bring this up often to my experts like yourself. One of them has to do with the idea of not some, yeah, I guess AI hallucinations, but you recall back in the good old days when we thought about computers playing the game of Go or playing chess, so we
Mhm.
wouldn't have to,
That's
right? What
true.
a time saver that's been. I don't have to play chess anymore. Um, the whole idea of GANs, right? The adversarial network
Network.
made a lot of
Yes.
sense. Why don't we have, especially as the cost of models drops, why don't we run two or three models and pick the best two out of three? Like, can't you
Yep.
stop an hallucination by rejecting a citation that only shows up in one of the three requests, to build a
Yep.
court case. Have you seen anybody talking about asking, models to challenge themselves or doing a majority count? Um,
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think there are some approaches that are coming up. There are papers also that are coming up, and it's a smart idea, James, is to really have another kind of expert, quote unquote, to check the work of another model, right? One such kind of example, it's not exactly it's kind of used for hallucinations as well, is the approach of LLM as a judge. So when you're
yes, right.
evaluating various sort of test cases of in a particular domain, whether this model or this agent is performing up to the quality or not, you you can do it human evaluations and say, yeah, this quality is good, the summary is good, and so on, right? Because there's no one right answer. The summary can be written in 2 or 3 different ways, and you and I might both can write legitimate summaries which differ in slightly different ways. Now, you need something you want to evaluate it, but you can't get enough of humans and time to evaluate all these use cases across millions of sort of data points and so on in companies. And usually that's expensive. So what people have started using is they're giving certain examples of maybe 1,000 examples of a human ratings, or a few hundreds at least, and saying, hey, look, this is the way, this is what good looks like, this is what bad looks like.
Ah, I see.
and
Yes, right, right.
and training another model which you have not used for the actual generation in your production for the particular system, using another model equally capable perhaps, and saying, hey, look at these examples, this is what good looks like, this is what bad looks like, learn from this how to rate similar unseen
Yes, I
examples.
see. And if you own those three models, you could say, let's feed this back to those model development, but you don't.
That's right.
You and I
Yeah,
are in a position of consuming models. There's no way I can call up,
that's right.
Sam Altman and have him change a model.
Yeah,
But
they
but I
cannot.
like what you're saying is you
Yeah,
basically train the judge. So instead of doing a simple majority count, which is
yeah,
passive, you would basically. Do you
correct,
think
correct.
we'll reach the stage where we will have composable AI that it will say, if you want a picture of, somebody in uniform with a name tag, it knows
Mhm,
name tag, it knows uniform, it knows person,
mhm,
rather than grabbing every picture of a person in uniform and sort of running them through a blender?
yeah, yeah,
Like, are we going to reach the stage where you can tell AI, I know what a shrimp is?
right.
So can we reach that stage where we can tell AI to think in slices rather than
Yeah,
just saying, here's all of human knowledge, come back in a
yeah.
year and give me something interesting?
I think so. I think it's becoming, yeah, we are seeing a rapid evolution of this composability, if you will, of it generated a piece which is text or image or video or something, and saying, I like the rest of 80% of it, but don't like this slice of it, this paragraph, replace this paragraph, or I don't like, or this label doesn't look right. Or a lot of times, if you see synthetic images, the hands don't look right.
Exactly. It doesn't have a concept of five
Yeah,
fingers. It's sort of drawing the
right.
average hand.
That's right. Somehow you can. I always look at sort of the hands and sort of determine,
Exactly.
saying
Yeah.
it is, no, this is artificial, because the face sometimes is very real. The hair, it's pretty. You have some inclination of, it could have been a touched up real photograph, or maybe it's synthetic, I can't tell. But I look at hands and legs and feet and fingers and so on, and there is something to it that the models are really faltering there. But I'm pretty sure, knowing that these are the flaws, the models, the next generation ones, will
We'll
become
solve
better
that.
at learning that, and also being able to decompose a picture into saying, oh, the label he's saying is not good, so let me regenerate only that part, and keeping the rest of it pretty, he seems to be
Right,
satisfied.
right. So you could not only
Right.
save money but
So
build
I
almost like an
think
evolutionary thing.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I think it'll get there. Yes.
So, in our remaining minutes, I appreciate your so much giving me your time and your thoughts. And Kaushik, I'd love to have you back later this year, perhaps, and hear where your agentic AI journey is going, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Perhaps I could
absolutely.
join you with, some others that are doing this at scale, make it more of a
Yeah.
panel. But
Yeah.
do you have any predictions for what is going to be the hottest, excuse me, AI news? Excuse me. Looking back, let's say at the end of 2026, about a year and a half from now, what is
Right.
likely to be the hottest AI story?
There's so much, it this is almost like, the famous thing that Watson supposedly said at IBM at some point,
Yeah, the
that
world only needs
the
what, five?
worldwide the worldwide market for computers is five.
Yeah,
Right.
or something. Yeah,
Famous, I guess, words that he would be,
yeah,
challenged, obviously, right? So predictions are like that, obviously, and I'm sure we'll hallucinate on that, just like the models that we are trying to use. But jokes apart, I think the capabilities are. I'm astounded by how fast it is progressing, right? And I wrote the vision paper initially for generative AI along with a couple of colleagues at Salesforce 2 years ago. The one, we got many things right in it, but the one thing we really could not have anticipated is the pace of change, and
yes.
also the open source movement really producing models that are challenging just as well the closed source ones, the proprietary ones, right?
Right.
And
And
so that's
the competitive variety has
and the
really
comparative
surprised
variety,
me.
right?
I mean,
Right.
given the hurdles for these, you would think it's one of those technologies that only one or two, massively funded companies can have, and yet I can't even keep up with the names.
I cannot keep up. Yeah, exactly. The
Yeah,
names,
it's amazing how there's been a good competitive response
right?
given the
Given,
hurdles,
yeah,
initial
right.
hurdles.
So to sort of look into the crystal ball, I mean, obviously there are predictions out there. Many people talking about AGI. There are articles in New York Times and others warning people that we should be prepared for AGI, which is artificial general intelligence,
Yeah,
and some form of super intelligence. Some people don't like the term, but essentially some form of intelligence where majority of the tasks the AI is better than humans. Majority of a
yeah,
variety of tasks, right? That doesn't. So we are getting to a point where in a lot of tasks, AI is better than humans, right? Chess, we were long been beaten in chess
yeah.
now, and but also in now language understanding and reading comprehension and even increasingly common sense was a really a barrier that I thought wouldn't fall very easily, but it seems like it's coming to pass as well.
Yeah, not
Coding,
so much in what's called naive physics. Dr. Omelinsky, who we both know, that's one of his favorite tests,
that's
is
right,
asking
that's
it
right.
very simple physics questions. But I think even
Yes,
that's been improving.
they're improving significantly.
Yeah,
And there are people in the planning world who talk about blocks world problems where there's a fundamental ability of models to plan or not, simple blocks world problems and they're
yeah,
faltering on. Now, I think coding software development will undergo a significant or sea change, in the next year and a half. There will be a lot more task automation that will happen to the point where we will start to see some dominoes of some jobs falling to succumbing to the, the the models and the reliability that they bring and the consistency and the cost savings that they bring. And we will probably not yet see the education getting revamped because it takes time for curriculum to change. But I think I would suggest that needs to change pretty rapidly for people who are studying right now
yes,
and entering colleges and so on. And I think academia is lagging industry in this case pretty significantly.
yes, absolutely. Yeah,
And I think global power shifts, you will start to see some pretty important ones of how this AI and the models that they're bringing plays out. Uh, Things like even ambient intelligence in the sense that AI becoming so cheap and embedded in so many different devices, you'll start to see many devices that are powered with AI and natively sort of the phone itself is probably ripe for change. iPhone came out about 18 years ago, right?
right.
So that's close to 2 decades, and that's definitely probably ripe for change, an AI kind of native sort of phone, if you will. So there are many things that are kind of going to reshape the models, getting more powerful, cheaper, faster, smaller as well, which has large scale implications for home robotics and all kinds of
Yes,
things.
yeah.
Right? We've now solved the problem of models doing creative tasks for them. Let's have them do the laundry and the dishes.
Yes, exactly. I read that a lot, and I think that's actually true.
Right?
So,
We are otherwise we'll be left doing the laundry and the dishes.
yes, exactly.
Right.
Um, Kaushal, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Again, I'd love to have you back later. Let me go ahead and close out this call and let you get on with your day. And I'd like to thank my listeners for engaging with us. Let us know what you think, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the
Bye.
time.